Hello, welcome to another episode of the DRH Show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by an author, speaker, and journalist, Erica Crompton. Thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dennis. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here, Erica. Let's start off with you telling us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Well, it's quite a complicated story, and there's been lots of different jobs and boyfriends and diagnosis along the way. Contact with really around 2002, and I just loved the impression. I mean, I believed at the time that the people that I worked with were wanting me to off. You know, it was kind of around the time attacks that this happened. But I'd also met just before the job a friend at university, and she'd seen me kind of quite upset about my parents my mum drinking in the student union bar, and she told me, just kind of trying to reassure me, that I would see the light. And I'd taken that quite literally, and I thought that I needed to kind of change my consciousness so I could see the face of God. Which is a bit random. So I had all these different crazy thoughts going on in my head, but I was keeping them to myself. But I was losing a lot of weight, and I think my mum especially was noticing when I left the job at the Telegraph that things weren't quite right. And it was eventually when I was 22 and living at home with my mum and my sister, saving up for a trip to New York, that my mum found me under the bed at 3 a.m. one morning looking for spy equipment. And that was kind of like the moment that I got in touch with mental health services. My mum took me to the GP the next day. I saw a psychiatrist a few weeks later, and I was diagnosed with psychotic depression. And I was put on a low dose of antipsychotics. That was my first kind of being in touch with mental health services. And I knew very little about mental health at the time, you know. I kind of thought that, oh God, you know, everyone's going to be terrified of me, and you know, I shouldn't have children because if I have children, I'll probably murder them. And I was just, you know, it was dreadful, really. And you only really get, you know, 15 minutes with a psychiatrist, and they don't have time to tell you all about what psychosis is and background and, you know, what it really is. While you see them, they just have the time to diagnose you and give you the medication. So yeah, that was when I first presented to mental health services, and I had this diagnosis of psychotic depression, which later was re-diagnosed as paranoid psychosis. There's more of a paranoid element to what I was experiencing, and you know, I continued with my life. You know, I just thought, I'm going to keep this hidden. I'm not going to tell anyone about it, least of all employers. And I went to New York as planned. I had a job out there for a photographic agency. So I went and worked for 3 months in New York, and my emotional and mental health state was just terrible. I remember walking down the street in New York on my way to work, and I had this really strange sensation that everything around me had gone soft. It felt really weird. It felt like I was sinking, but kind of being stretched at the same time. It was very strange. And I didn't attribute that. It's a tactile hallucination. I found out much later on through just listening to other people's stories. But at the time, I thought it was some kind of spiritual getting in touch with God experience as a kind of reoccurring theme in my delusions. But yeah, then I went back to university and got a degree in journalism. I kind of thought, well, I'm not really up to working much, so I'll go and get a degree. And I settled down in London for a bit, and I had various jobs in PR, and I finally settled on a fashion writing job at John Lewis after my degree. And it was kind of like an eight years no man's land, where I was just treading water on this low dose, but I was paranoid all the time. You know, I was always thinking that I was being bullied. I was always having strange thoughts about God, mainly kind of preoccupied with God and spiritual experiences. And I think, you know, friends at the time fed into that because maybe they're spiritual too, and you know, they might have strange ideas about psychics and past lives, and it might kind of feed into my delusions. Boyfriend at the time that insisted that I work, and my fair share the working ladder. So that was quite difficult. And finally, after a decade of working in London and kind of treading water on the low dose, I stopped the medication, reading and psychiatry literature, and then I full on had a breakdown, which led to a suicide attempt in a rundown flat in Birmingham. And that was kind of a turning point for me. I know it's a cliche, but sometimes things need to get worse before they can get better. But it was a turning point for me, and I was able to access the help and a decent dose of antipsychotic medication that could keep me stable. But it was also a turning point in my career for me. I remember during that episode of psychosis that I had this beautiful dream, like in the midst of, all this psychosis, that I was flying through the sky and knocking out clouds of the sky with a sparkly hammer. And I saw it as a metaphor for what I wanted to do going forward with my work when I finally recovered, in that I want to challenge some of the stigma to psychosis and schizophrenia, and knock those clouds of stigma out the sky. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. And yeah, so I'd been in hospital. The road to recovery has been quite a long one, but one thing that's remained is my mental health campaigning. And shortly after I got out of hospital, I started writing in a freelance capacity because it was something I could do in my own time, and I can bash out 1,000 words quite quickly. So I wrote a piece called "I'm Mad But Not Bad" for The Independent in 2010, and it just detailed my experiences of psychosis and how I felt that songs on the radio were sending me messages and helicopters were watching me from the sky. And it was just my own experience of psychosis. And it was kind of about some of the discrimination I'd experienced along the way, people that had found out or I'd disclosed to. I was actually stunned by the response of this article. I mean, I was kind of going to write about travel and spirituality and all these different kinds of things, mental health, just one thing to explore. And I was just so surprised. I got like 300 emails the day that piece was published saying that it really helped them, and people wanted to add me on Facebook, and people wanted to take me for a drink or a pint and say thanks for sharing that article. It was really brave. And I guess after that kind of feedback, I thought, well, actually, maybe this is something that I should do, channel more energy into. So I then, there wasn't many more opportunities at The Independent, but there was a new health editor at the Mail on Sunday, Barney. And he started commissioning articles, and we did an article, single female writer, good sense of humor, schizophrenic, would love to eat similar. So we did explored like dating and psychosis and other stuff as well. And I've just kind of been working on mental health campaigning since 2010, doing similar articles. And some of them might be quite repetitive if you follow all the articles, but I think they're all through different channels, different magazines, different newspapers. I started public speaking in 2014 after someone found me on Twitter. It was an agent, and I've kept that agent over time. So it was at my first public lecture that I met Stephen Laurie, and Stephen Laurie, he is now co-author for my book, The Beginner's Guide to Sanity, and together we've combined 50 years of experience, me 2 decades of living psychosis, and him like 30 years of working in a clinic as a psychiatrist, and we've combined that experience to produce like a self-help guide for people with psychosis. So yeah, I'm just I guess I'm focusing on writing about psychosis and giving talks about psychosis. And I've started a master's degree in creative writing recently. So I'm hoping to write more and more. Whether psychosis is a big enough topic to spend a whole career writing about, I'm sure it might be. But I'm hoping to write more books. Yeah.
It's really a remarkable story of recovery, Erica. Thank you for walking us through. And as an adjunct to your story, unknown to many, in 2018, I delivered a lecture about mental health. And I mentioned you as an example of one of those people who have benefited from, the writing process in relation to their mental health recovery. So if you could just share how, you already alluded to it earlier, but if you could just mention to us how the writing process benefited you, not just, I suppose, you personally, but of course the people I suppose that there's already a sense of awareness how it is, learning from someone who's got lived experience of psychosis, and it's a very, serious mental health issue.
Well, absolutely, and I think that writing of all kind, I mean, it's kind of it's almost a cliche that you get kind of poetry and creative writing workshops in hospital settings, but there's other sorts of writing, more professional sorts of writing, such as blogging and journalism and script writing, that can be just as beneficial for mental health. And I personally find writing these first person journalistic pieces really cathartic, and it's just kind of the act of sharing a problem, that kind of that kind of old adage, a problem shared is a problem halved. Problems, it's helping me get it down on paper and kind of work things out for myself. And it also gives me access, I mean, especially as a journalist, writing for the national press, it gives me access to some top psychiatrists and psychologists. And I remember when I was 33, I wrote a piece for the Mail on Sunday about, am I crazy to want a baby when I'm schizophrenic? And I was just kind of openly pondering whether I should have a baby or not. And I didn't know, and I only have 15 minutes with my own psychiatrist, so it was really helpful just to spend a month on that project, kind of thinking, do I want to do this? What are the pros? What are the cons? And weighing it up in a balanced way. And I got access to about 5 psychiatrists that I interviewed for that piece, and each of them had a wealth of different stories from their own clinics. People that have done well doing that, and people that have had really bad outcomes. And it was just really helpful, for me. But then, of course, it's not just beneficial for me writing it and getting access to all those professionals, whether it's blogging or journalism. But when you share the story, you're then sharing that problem and everything you've thought about and all the people that you've interviewed, you're condensing it down and kind of sharing it with people, so they can kind of come on the journey with you and consider things with you. And I know that story in particular was shared by people who were in long-term relationships, and pregnancy was on their mind too, and they found it helpful. And yeah, that article in particular was shared a lot, but I think other people find it helpful. And I think just from talking more generally about psychosis, like with relationships and symptoms and problems and stuff, people can relate to it. And I think that in the past, psychosis has been so stigmatized, and schizophrenia, it's so stigmatized, that people are afraid to come out. They're afraid to say, well, hey, I've got this diagnosis. And by doing that and putting it out there in a public forum, you're kind of saying, actually, it's okay. You're giving people permission to say it's okay, I've got this too. And I think it kind of helps people feel less alone. And I think it also gives something people to relate to, in essentially what is quite a bizarre experience.
And of course, what you're saying is not just anecdotal evidence, actually supported by research. And the reason why I'm familiar about this, I don't want it to sound nerd, but for my research project for my MSc, I explored the idea of expressive writing. It's an idea proposed by a psychologist, by James Pennebaker, in the 1980s. And his notion is that the more you allow people to talk about their past experiences, it actually benefits them, because it allows them to make sense of their well-being. And like what you've mentioned, it's really an important component, because I suppose through writing and through talking with your friends and family and other individuals as well, it allows you to benefit from a mental health support network. And so I want to explore how you benefited from your family. How did they support you when they found out about your diagnosis?
Well, it's been a road to recovery for all of us, really. And I think that if I had those preconceptions about psychosis being like an axe welding murderer, I think that other people, even friends and family, can have that preconception too. So it can be quite a I think it can make people a little bit nervous at first when they don't know about it. But over time, my family and my friends have come to research psychosis and read the articles and read, you know, the magazines and the newspapers and the books and watch the films, and they've educated themselves on it so they can know more about it. And my book, it's not just it's to help those that are, you know, looking after someone with psychosis, because I mean, it can be really frustrating. Like, I know my mum says it was so frustrating for her. Like, you know, I thought I'd committed a crime, and I thought people were after me. I thought that I could hear police sirens. You know, I thought that songs on the radio were kind of targeting me, and like a flicker on the TV, I thought that was a secret message. And I think it can be very frustrating for a person, like, especially living with someone in that situation. It can be very frustrating to know that they're wrong and to not be able to get through to them. I think that's really frustrating. So I think that, you know, my mum was absolutely right to take me to the GP, and he was absolutely right to refer me to a psychiatrist. But yeah, it's been a learning journey for all of us, and you know, they're really, my family are really supportive now. My mum's really proud of what I've done. She's got a little box in her living room with all my articles in. My dad and his wider family are really supportive as well, and I can go and stay in their house as like a countryside retreat whenever I feel the need. And friends have been really great too. And one of the things useful when I was in London and on that kind of treading water phase was join a mental health support group. And it was on meetup.com when that first started. And I think there was about 200 members online, but there was about 6, 7 or 8 of us that would always reliably meet up at each and every meetup. And we did that over the course of about a year, just meeting up before the group was disbanded. But those 6, 7, 8 of us have stayed in touch. Some of us share diagnosis. You know, I count the group organizer as one of my best friends. And it's really nice not just to have support from family and friends, but also to have that support from peers who have been through the same experience as you. You know, it's just sharing experiences and sharing what helps, what doesn't help, and it means a lot to me to have someone to be able to relate to my experiences, as strange as they are and have been. So that's been really important in friends and family support as well, like peer support. But yeah, that's kind of how, you know, it's been a road for us all to kind of get used to the diagnosis and what it means and the stigma from others. And I think it's a journey that will probably last a lifetime.
I would imagine you've incorporated that story within your book. If you could just tell us about your book again, The Beginner's Guide to Sanity.
Okay, I'll just show it to you so you can get a look. So this is like my copywriting skills from when I worked in London coming into action, The Beginner's Guide to Sanity. So it's helping people that maybe have lost touch with reality stay sane, because this book is kind of, you know, I think there's kind of different strands of mental health, and there's kind of a strand of mad pride which kind of revels in the madness. And this is a little bit different to that. It's kind of saying, well, actually, you know, maybe it's really good to be normal, maybe it's good to be sane, maybe it's good to fit in, and these are the steps to kind of get you there. And the first half of the book is mainly the professor Stephen. He talks a lot about causes, diagnostics, medications. So all the questions that you have when you're first diagnosed, and you're in with a psychiatrist for 15 minutes and you've got all these questions, but there's no time to go through it all. And the first half of this book is kind of going through all the questions you have about psychosis or schizophrenia. All the different psychotic illnesses are in there. And then talking about different medications and what they do and how helpful they are. And then the second half of the book is kind of me going through. I mean, I'm 40. I turned 40 in August. So I've pretty much since 20 had psychosis. So it's been 2 decades of managing this illness. And I know when it came to writing the book, you know, people say writing is hard, but for me, writing the second part of this book was so easy. It was like, right, what have I tried to stay sane that I can tell people about and how it worked and how it helped? And literally, I just wrote in about half an hour 100 different ways that I'd tried to keep well and keep myself healthy and my mind kind of in shape. So there's like 100 ways to stay sane in there, and it ranges from everything from like bars therapy, which is it's kind of like alternative therapy that focuses on healing your past lives, to more conventional stuff like talking therapies and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and compassion focused therapy, you know, Reiki, shamanism, hip hop. There's so many different things in there. And what I do is I kind of write in a little bit in an academic style and looking at and how I found them useful, drawing on evidence from journals that I found online, and then at the end of that, the conversation, and we're saying, you know, you for yourself, if you want to reduce anxiety, it worked for Erica, Stephen's not so sure, you decide. So it kind of lets people decide for themselves. And we've tried to be like humane and non-judgmental in writing the book, so there's no kind of like moral high ground taken, you know. But it covers everything. Like, you know, I bought this cottage for myself a couple of years ago after a breakup. So look at like housing, benefits, all things that could be useful that your psychiatrist might not tell you when he's with you. Driving as well. I recently got back on the road after a spell not off the road. So there's certain things that you need to know about driving as well. And, you know, it's stuff that as I go along, you know, I'm picking up on and writing about, exploring a little bit more in articles. But yeah, we hope it's really helpful for people. And, you know, provisions on mental health in the UK, you know, and probably beyond as well, are so sparse, you know, like we don't have much time to treat people. And we hope this is a cost-effective and useful resource that people can pick up, dip into, you know, the chapters that are relevant to them, and just keep it as like a resource to help them when they need help.
I think that would be a very useful book, without sounding patronizing, because, you know, when you have a mental health diagnosis, no one really prepares you for it. It doesn't come with a manual, and I suppose someone who has lived experience such as yours, you pretty much, you know, pick up bits and pieces that, you know, would kind of manage the symptoms and make the road to recovery a lot easier. So your book would really be useful for those who are struggling with the recovery process. Now, you mentioned something about compassion-focused therapy, and when I was preparing for this interview, you mentioned on your website that you benefited from compassion-focused therapy. Now, a lot of people may not be familiar with that sort of therapy entails, so if you could just kind of explore that for us.
Well, it's great, and I think the starting point for anyone interested in not just compassion-focused therapy, but just the whole kind of concept of compassion would do well to check out books by Paul Gilbert, and he's the founder of the therapy, compassion-focused therapy, and what it does is it's kind of inspired by CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's looking at changing thought patterns and behavior, and it's teaching us to be kinder to ourselves. And I think it's so kind of relevant right now, you know, with the kind of be kind movement and everything. But it's like, you know, you can be kind to others, but when you're talking to yourself, how do you talk to yourself? And I think a lot of us can be overly critical, and our harshest judgment comes from ourselves. So this is looking at saying to yourself, well, actually, you know, you're meeting up a party, you're feeling run down, worn out, your mental health isn't great, and it's about saying it's okay to not go to the party, you know, and don't beat yourself up over it. I think a lot of people for not to, you know, it's about giving yourself, be kind to yourself. But I think one thing that's worth sharing that I always talk about when I'm giving keynotes on compassion focused therapy is this technique that anyone can do to improve happiness, is to keep a book. And I've got mine in a little Hello Kitty folder, but at the end of every week, I'll take all the compliments, whether it's a tweet or a handwritten note or an email or a text or a phone call. I'll keep all these good things, all these positivity, good feedback. I'll keep it and I'll print it out and put it in the book. And then whenever I'm feeling down, I read it cover to cover, and it's constantly growing. I dip in and out of it. I don't do it religiously every week, but it's constantly growing, and it's so nice. Like if my mood dips low, which it so often does with schizophrenia, I will read this book and my mood will be instantly lifted. It's great. And I think that's like a technique that I've read an article I wrote about compassion focused day. It's like such a good technique for improving happiness and challenging low moods.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Erica, aside from your book, you also have your own magazine. Can you tell us when you launch it?
Yeah, I've got some copies to show you here to share. So this is called Hope Zine. Get those in there. Rays of Light amid the darkness. And this happened, like, I was always really nervous about talking about a suicide attempt that led me to put me on the road to recovery ultimately. But it was kind of, I don't know, I didn't want to talk about it. But then a couple of years ago, I lost 2 friends to suicide. And we weren't close. We were just kind of on Facebook as old acquaintances. It really kind of moved me. I think they were like copycat suicides where one had done it and then the next had done it. But it really kind of moved me in a profound way. And I've just it really brought home soft suicidal thoughts and how many people attempt their own life. And, these are needless deaths. We can absolutely challenge these deaths. They need not happen. And so I decided after that to use my own experience of surviving a suicide attempt and surviving suicidal bring about this hope zine. It's a magazine that it's a zine really. It's only 12 pages in total, but it's basically stories from myself about surviving suicide and staying well, and stories from friends and family and the wider community about how they've survived suicidal thoughts. And it's just it's meant to be like positivity and a kind of a resource, a little bit different, a little bit changed, and it's kind of designed to help people feel better and give them ideas for recovery. And I sell these on Etsy, but if I ever see anyone on Twitter feeling down or anything, I'll send them out freely. And sometimes if you a couple, a friend who also knew the people that we lost to suicide that summer, and he's kind of got his own company, and he's kindly agreed to sponsor the back pages with an advert. So we're looking forward to another 3 issues coming up of that. So that's my zine, Hope Zine it's called.
And brilliant. Those are really wonderful initiatives. As you've said, people, many of us have been affected by mental health issues, whether directly or indirectly. And I suppose the least that we can do is just, spread the conversation, spread awareness about it. And magazine is definitely one of those medium that we could, harness. And aside from your magazine, aside from your book, I understand that you're on your spare time, you have, I don't even know if you even have a spare time because you've been very busy, but on your spare time, you also create T-shirts for those with mental illness. So tell us about that T-shirts.
It's kind of on the back burner at the moment. I did when I just got out of hospital. And what I wanted to do with them was like challenge some of these bleak stereotypes of people with psychosis that we see in the media. One of the things I created was a bracelet, and it had written in diamond, psycho. And I just wanted to take that word psycho, which we sometimes see in the paper, unfortunately, and it's quite cruel and it's very stigmatizing. And I wanted to do something with that. For someone with psychosis to wear loud and proud and say, yeah, it's psycho, but look, it's made of diamonds. And another thing I did, the dream I had where I was knocking out the clouds of stigma out the sky with a hammer, I did actually create that hammer, and I went out and bought a hammer and decorated it with sequins and diamonds, and kind of wanted to do something like that. So it's kind of a bit of a dreamy project. And I still have a Facebook page for MedFed, but I tend to update that with articles and journalism. I did do a BA honours top up in fine art a couple of years ago, and there was more scope and space then to kind of concentrate on my art pieces and my fashion. And again, I sell some of that on Etsy occasionally, and it's just like, I mean, like writing art is another creative outlet that can be really cathartic for people's mental health. And it's just really nice to sit down and get into a kind of flow of something, and then have something that you create at the end of it that might be quite beautiful.
Absolutely. So you've been quite busy, Erica, with all the initiatives that you're involved with in relation to mental health. So what keeps you going? What makes you motivated?
I think medication probably keeps me motivated more than anything. Yeah, what keeps me motivated? I don't know. I think there's still so much stigma. I mean, kind of. I spent the summer on some of the dating apps, and it's kind of getting messages: "Are you an axe murderer?" And crazy cat lady. You obviously got a mental health problem because you got cats. And there's just so many misconceptions about what is crazy, what is normal, what is acceptable. And I think that so long as there's those misconceptions out there, I think it will keep me motivated to challenging them and kind of putting the world to rights, whether it's in an article or a book or a zine or a piece of art, kind of putting the world to rights and saying, well, actually, I think it's 1 in 20 people will experience psychosis at some point in their lives. So actually, this is quite a normal experience. It's just that it's not talked about. And I think that, that's a message that I really want to drive home, and that kind of keeps me motivated to keep doing what I'm doing.
Now, Erica, let's dive into your role as a writer. Can you tell us what makes a good writing style?
Oh, that's a good question. What makes a good writing style? I'm just kind of thinking about what we're drawing on at university at the moment. And I think that good influences make a good, you've got to read, I mean, you kind of hear about writers that don't read, and it seems a bit silly. But you've got to read more and keep the inspiration flowing. Yeah, I essentially, I believe that anyone can write. It's just about having the confidence to do it. So I guess when I've run workshops, I've run some writing workshops for patients on a forensic ward before. And I've also taught at university level journalism. And I think for me, with writing style and what makes it good, I think it's all about confidence. Sure, there's some people that have natural talent, but I think that sort of talent can always be built on. And I think if you work hard, you can get there with some kind of dogged determination. But I do think with writing and many different creative endeavors, I think that everyone's got what it takes. It just takes a little bit of a push and a bit of confidence to get there. And still got far to go myself. I'm still learning. I'm studying it still. So I've still got quite a lot to learn myself, I think. Yeah.
Well, we do actually overlaps because obviously I'm managing a blog, a mental health blog called PsychReg. And I just want to add on to what you said. For me, what really makes a good writing is that, if you're able to deliver what you're trying to say. And sometimes you really have to understand your audience. I understand you're doing your academic writing because you're doing your master's degree. And sometimes, because I also from an academic background, and at the moment I'm also doing my PhD. And I don't want to talk bad about, academic style of writing, but sometimes it really, how do I say this without offending people in the academia? Sometimes it puts me off because, like when you read academic writing, like what exactly are you trying to say? And for me, like a good style of writing is that you really express yourself in the shortest possible words.
I totally agree. And you know what, in terms of academic writing, there's one writer that I think is a really bad writer, and that's Foucault. Yeah. And he's he makes his ideas so inaccessible, that he's only writing for other academics. And what's the point in helping the underdog if they can't actually understand what you're writing in the first place?
Yeah, I like what you said about accessibility. I think you have to make if you really have a powerful idea, you have to make it accessible. And that is, of course, especially true when you're talking about mental health issues. Now, let's talk about, let's go back to talking about schizophrenia. obviously you're doing a lot of initiatives to spread awareness about schizophrenia, about psychosis, and about mental health in general. But do you know of any relevant mental health charity or support group networks who people who are suffering with schizophrenia or psychosis could tend to?
Absolutely, yeah. There's many different resources. There's many different books. It's not just my book. There's other books as well. But for charities, the one to go to, the big one is Rethink for Schizophrenia, and it was actually originally called the Schizophrenia Fellowship. So Rethink Mental Illness is one to check out. I think it's rethink.org. Mind charity, the mental health charity, also have great resources on their website that have fact sheets on schizophrenia and psychosis and the differences between the two. The NHS also have different kind of detailed descriptions of what different diagnoses on the schizo spectrum would be. So yeah, I think they're the big ones: Rethink, Mind, and the NHS. But I also think in terms of stigma and how you can get involved and kind of do work like I do, Time to Change is also very good. I gave a talk for them earlier in the year about living with schizophrenia, and I think they've kind of gone so far. It's like a government funded initiative. They've gone so far to kind of help with challenging the stigma to illnesses like depression and anxiety, but they're finding as time goes by that actually it's not really helped diagnosis like ours, with schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder. So they're working now, they're taking steps to address that and kind of look more at so yeah, that's another one to check out if you're interested in getting involved in some of the anti-stigma campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to touch upon what you said earlier, Erica. You mentioned that there's negative portrayal of people with mental health issues or schizophrenia or psychosis in the media. Now, well, we can't really deny the fact that we've made significant progress when it comes to mental health. But what changes would you like to happen within the mental health landscape, aside from the shift in the way mental health issues are portrayed in the media? But other than that, what changes would you like to see?
Well, there's one in particular that I can think of. I know that in the England and Scotland, they do this differently, but I think that in England, we should have what they do in Scotland in terms of the law. That is, when someone commits a crime, if they're seen as unfit to stand trial by media, by the courts, they should also be seen as unfit for trial by the media. So yeah, I don't think we should have like crime reporting for people that have been deemed unfit for trial in the courts, because I think trial by media is just as bad. So they already got that in place in Scotland. If someone commits a crime and they're seen as mentally unwell, or they already have a diagnosis, they will go straight to hospital. Whereas here, they might get dragged through the press, which really is not going to help them. So I think that would really help the crime reporting, and that's more kind of the reserve of local newspapers. And I think they're a little bit like dinosaurs, the local newspapers. They haven't got much to report, so they kind of do this. And I think restrictions there legally in terms of what gets reported would be really helpful. There are guidelines. I think the Samaritans have guidelines to responsible reporting on suicide. I think with suicide, you can get like copycat suicides, where one person will read about a method, and if they're feeling low themselves, they might copy that person. So you're not meant to write about methods of suicide. And all these guidelines are accessible. I mean, a journalist can access them at any time they want. But it's whether they do, whether they I guess mental health really needs to be prioritized for journalists, so they actually read the material that's out there for responsible reporting.
Mm-hmm. And Erica, is there a particular individual who has the greatest influence to your work?
Oh, that's a good question. An individual. I really like Ellen Sachs. I've interviewed her, and it was an absolute privilege and an honor. I really like her, and she's a professor of psychiatry and law and mental health law at a university in America. She's written her memoirs, but she kind of works as a lecturer and manages schizophrenia around that. And she's just really nice. She's like she is just great. She is she is who she, what you read about her, what you see about her in the media, that is what she's like, you know. So that's really nice. She's really inspired me. I think Alistair Campbell has really inspired me too, and he's actually kind of put me in touch with editors at the New European to write about my own experience of how art has helped me manage schizophrenia. So he's not just kind of relevant in that he talks about his brother's schizophrenia. His brother's passed away now, but he talks about his brother's experiences of schizophrenia and how that impacted on him, his own mental health. But at the same time, he's very approachable, you know, for someone with that bigger following and selling that many books. You know, he's very approachable, and he will help you if he feels that you have a good idea. So I think Ellen Sachs and Alistair Campbell have really helped me.
Mm-hmm. And what's the big message? What's the most important thing you want the public to know about your work as a psychologist, as a speaker, as a mental health advocate?
But just that, you know, just that when you read my story in the newspaper, you know, it's not just my story. There's 1 in 20 people behind me. So that's like 1 in every 20 people you have on Facebook will have psychosis or will have experienced psychosis. So I kind of want to say that this is a normal experience. You know, some of the symptoms are quite bizarre and strange, but essentially it's a normal experience. And, you know, I just kind of want to be treated like I'm normal, and I think that other people do too. And we don't want to be feared. We don't want to be seen as potential murderers. We don't want to be locked out of friendship circles or spoken about badly behind our backs. We don't want to be gaslighted either, which is when someone might use your diagnosis against you. So yeah, like, be kind to each other, and we're just normal, and 1 in 20 people will have experienced psychosis at some point in their lives is the kind of key message. So it's not just me that's talking here. There's like 1 in 20 people behind me that have psychosis that probably feel very similar or differently, that just want to get on with their lives, really.
Mm-hmm. You've written for the biggest publications in the country, so I'm sure you've come across with some of the misconceptions about a career in journalism. So if you could kind of mention some misconceptions and address those misconceptions about a career in journalism.
I think journalism is seen as this kind of like hard-nosed, hard-drinking, blokey profession, and things have changed so much since the late 70s, when it was this kind of like smoke-filled, alcohol-filled newsroom full of hard-nosed journalists. You know, it can be quite accessible now, and I think for me especially, freelance journalism has been so good. I have my freelance journalism, which provides me with a certain income, and then I have some benefits that provide me with income in addition to that. So I think it happens. There was a report by the National Union of Journalists where they looked at freelance journalism and the average salary. And the average salary of a freelance journalist was about below £5,000, and people were getting state benefits. And I think a lot of people within that bracket, not just mental health issues, also like, you know, maybe autism, learning difficulties or other disabilities. And I think when you're stuck, kind of, you know, like having paranoia makes it quite hard for me to access a room full of people. So office work would be problematic for me. So freelance journalism allows me to work in this office alone from home, quite peaceful, quite quiet. And it gives me time to take off as well. Like if I'm getting too tired, which is one of the side effects of my medication, I can take a nap or I can go for a walk, and then I can come back to the article. And, you know, it might take me a week to produce 1,000 words where I'm just kind of dipping in and out of it, and then I'll take another week going back and forth to the editor. And it's like, I would think that a waitress had more stress with the daily deadlines of every meal. It's not like a staff journalist will have those pressures, you know, but a freelance journalist can pick and choose the assignments they do, and it can kind of work around you as an accessible career. And I think that more and more people are doing that, especially with mental health. You know, there's a lot of mental health campaigners that are also writers or bloggers, and they might have it as a side income, they might just have it as a cathartic hobby. But I think more and more people are using freelance journalism as an accessible career that can work around their own unique disabilities.
And what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a writer or as a speaker?
Well, I was thinking of actually becoming a dog walker more recently. I was thinking, oh, maybe when I finish my course and get all the books that I've written done, I really love little miniature dogs. And I'd been thinking about putting an advert in the local post office to offer I really love walking as well. I find it a great way to stay sane and well and healthy. So I think if I wasn't a journalist, I'd probably be walking dogs.
Now, Erica, you have a powerful lived experience when it comes to mental health. Can you share us some top tips about managing a mental health and well-being, especially that on Friday, it's the World Mental Health Day?
Okay, that's great. So the
Saturday,
happy book is
corrected. It's Saturday, World Mental Health Day.
Saturday. Okay, Saturday's World Mental Health Day. So I mean, the things that work for me might not work for everyone else, but the happy book seems to work for a lot of people, where you're collecting positive feedback, positive messages, and keeping them in a journal. A gratitude journal that you write yourself if you may not have a wider community of people around you to feedback. Just keeping a diary of 3 things that you're grateful for every day. And it could be something really small, like a morning cup of tea on the balcony, a cuddle with my favourite cat, anything like that, even just like a really nice film that you've seen, or a really, or maybe a smile from a stranger in the street, just little things. And every day at the end of the day, just go to your journal and write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And over time, that can be really useful for like promoting feelings of happiness and gratitude and, contentment. So that's another key. I mean, walking for me is a big one. I kind of, over lockdown, before I started this master's, I was walking between 8 and 12 miles a day, which is this is quite time consuming. But I found it a great source of sanity. It's just like really nice to be around nature. And nature as well, not just walking, but getting out into nature, just getting out in the fresh air, even if you don't live in the countryside, is really nice. And then, yeah, I mean, it's different for different people. I mean, I find writing and art really helped me, but another person might find that they really enjoy watching telly, and like a week binge watching their favorite Netflix program might be just a tonic for another person. So I think focus on what you like, discover what you like if you don't know what you like, and just kind of do more of it. So kind of do more of what you love, and don't do it in moderation.
Yeah, ultimately you have to find a perfect distressing outlet, and we all need that, especially during these times. And finally, Erica, what else is in the pipeline? Do you have any upcoming speaking engagements?
Yeah, there's always plenty of stuff to look forward to. I have a memoir, a kind of memoir novella, medical memoir written. I'm 23,500 words in, and I'm looking for an agent to represent me so I can sell the book. But I'm hoping to put the book first through the MA and kind of get feedback and make it better and improve it. And once I've done that, I'm hoping to publish it. It's called The Mind Surfer, and it's about how to manage 20 decades of living with psychosis. So it's a bit more literary than the first self-help offering, and it's just me and kind of more unusual techniques I've done to stay well. So there's that, and I'd also hoped once I'd got a second book out and authored under just my own name, I was hoping to do like a PhD by publication, combines my books, my zine, and my journalism. And I wanted to look at like professional writing for better outcomes for people with schizophrenia. So I wanted to look not just at like the creative writing and the poetry, which we already know helps people, but I wanted to look at the more professional ways of helping people and the kind of innovative ways that it can help you financially. It can help you get a car, you might not ordinarily have access to. So there's other benefits to professional writing. Also, it's shorter form a lot. It's not like writing a book. Write an article can be just 1,000 words. A blog can be 500 words. So I want to do a PhD by publication on that topic. So I'll be looking into those 2 things. Dog walking, perhaps one day, if time permits.
Yeah. Well, Erica, let us know how you get on. It's been an insightful conversation with you, but unfortunately our time is up. Again, thank you for sharing your time, your expertise. I really look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure, Dennis. Thank you very much.